Yesterday, I was just his mother. Today, after he took out $1 million life insurance policy on me, I had to think twice before drinking the water he handed me. Life insurance policies are typically a gesture of care, a safeguard for loved ones in times of loss. But when such a policy is taken out on a parent by a child, with unusually high coverage and vague justifications, it raises chilling questions. The discovery of such a policy, especially without full consent or comprehension, can trigger a flood of suspicion and fear. In many countries, it's legally possible for someone to take out a life insurance policy on another person, provided there's an insurable interest and the insured person signs off on it. However, the fine print, the rushed paperwork, and the lack of full disclosure often blur the ethical lines. It becomes even more unsettling when the person initiating the policy stands to gain a substantial sum upon the other's death. The red flags begin with subtle signs, sudden discussions about mortality, veiled comments about financial futures, or an unusual urgency around paperwork. The discovery might occur through a misplaced document, an insurance company's call, or a digital alert. What's shocking is not just the existence of the policy, but its size, far larger than necessary to cover basic expenses and structured in a way that raises eyebrows. Motives can be obscured by plausible excuses, wanting to be prepared, taking financial responsibility, or planning ahead. But the emotional impact is severe. Trust begins to erode the moment it becomes clear that a loved one sees death not as a tragedy, but as a potential financial event. The idea of becoming more valuable dead than alive delivers a visceral blow, replacing comfort with unease. In many such cases, the policyholder, often elderly or less financially literate, is either not fully informed, or misled about what they're signing. Complex jargon, quick explanations, and emotional manipulation create a trap that only becomes visible in hindsight. The implications are not just financial, they're deeply personal, bordering on betrayal. This kind of discovery shifts everything. It forces a reassessment of relationships, intentions, and safety. When a son takes out a massive life insurance policy on a parent, the act itself speaks volumes, regardless of how innocent it may appear on the surface. It's no longer just about paperwork. It's about trust, survival, and the horrifying question, why now? Small gestures carry enormous weight when trust has been fractured. A bottle of water, ordinary, everyday, harmless, becomes loaded with suspicion when handed over by someone who now has a financial stake in your death. Context transforms meaning, and in this case, what should have been a caring act becomes a moment of chilling ambiguity. The day after a life insurance policy is taken out, emotions are already running high. Even if nothing overt is said, the atmosphere shifts. Tension enters the space between people. A simple action, like offering a drink, is no longer just thoughtful, it's scrutinized for motive. In an ordinary setting, hydration is kindness. In this one, it feels like a test. Was the seal broken? Was the water unusually cloudy, or did it smell faintly off? Maybe everything seemed perfectly normal. Too normal. That, in itself, raises questions. When suspicion enters a relationship, especially between family members, paranoia quickly follows, and paranoia, whether justified or not, thrives on the smallest details. The deeper psychological impact isn't about the water itself, it's about what the gesture represents. It's about the realization that trust has become so brittle, so compromised, that survival instincts start to override familial bonds. The Han, that once guided or cared, could now be the one that deceives. Even the possibility is enough to trigger dread. This moment, mundane in form but sinister in implication, creates a lasting imprint. It marks the point where innocence is lost. What was once a safe space becomes a mental minefield. Every future gesture becomes suspect. Every shared meal, every offered drink, every act of closeness now demands caution. What makes it worse is the plausible deniability. If confronted, the giver can easily laugh it off, act hurt, or accuse the other of being paranoid. There is no proof, only instinct. And when instinct starts warning of danger, even the absurd becomes believable. A bottle of water becomes a symbol of broken trust, hidden intentions, and the quiet fear that something irreversible has begun. This isn't about poison or crime, it's about perception, power, and the psychological corrosion that begins the moment love is shadowed by suspicion. When the cost of letting your guard down might be your life, even a glass of water can feel like a loaded weapon. Uncovering a potentially sinister motive behind a family member's actions requires more than just suspicion. It demands a confrontation with uncomfortable truths. When a son takes out a large life insurance policy on a parent, the natural question that follows is, why? Not just why in a practical sense, but why now, why this much, and why in such secrecy. Financial desperation is often the most common driver. Debt, unemployment, failed investments, or an expensive lifestyle can push someone to see loved ones not as support systems, but as solutions. A massive payout, guaranteed upon death, becomes an escape plan. The emotional line between love and utility begins to blur, but not all motives are financial in the obvious sense. Some are rooted in entitlement, the belief that inheritance is inevitable, and accelerating the timeline is merely a form of control. Others stem from manipulation by external influences, a partner wispy, ring toxic ideas, a friend suggesting shortcuts, or a peer normalizing unethical behavior under the guise of just being prepared. Then there's the psychological profile to consider. Some people harbor latent resentment toward their parents, perceived neglect, favoritism, or generational clashes that were never resolved. A life insurance policy in such cases might be less about money and more about reclaiming perceived power, balancing some emotional scale, or exercising control over mortality. Still, there's the possibility of ignorance, genuine naivety. The son might believe he's acting responsibly, doing what many financial advisors recommend, securing coverage in case of future funeral or medical expenses. But that theory weakens when the policy is excessive, secretive, or rushed. The line between preparedness and premeditation becomes dangerously thin. Behavior changes can be a strong indicator of motive. Sudden interest in health habits, frequent conversations about death, subtle distancing, or unexplained anxiety around paperwork can all point to an internal conflict. Often, the person isn't purely malicious. They're torn between guilt and greed, love and survival. Understanding motive isn't about excusing the act. It's about seeing the full landscape. It reveals whether the danger is real, imagined, or a combination of both. Motive turns suspicion into direction, allowing one to decide whether to confront, protect, or escape. In the end, discovering the why is essential, not just to understand the person behind the action, but to regain control over the fragile boundary between trust and betrayal. Confrontation in cases of suspected betrayal, especially within family, is never straightforward. When the stakes involve both emotional bonds and potential life-threatening implications, the conversation becomes more than just a dialogue. It becomes a battle between truth and facade, between instinct and denial. Bringing up the issue of a life insurance policy taken out under questionable circumstances immediately places both parties under a microscope. For the accuser, there is the risk of sounding paranoid or accusatory without concrete proof. For the accused, there is an opportunity to manipulate, deflect, or gaslight, especially if their intentions are hidden behind layers of justification. Often, the confrontation begins with questions. Why didn't you tell me? Or, what made you decide to do this now? These queries are not just about the policy, they are probes into the deeper motivations behind it. The answers vary, from feigned innocence to defensive outrage to calculated calmness designed to disarm suspicion. It's not always what's said, but how it's said that reveals the truth. In many cases, confrontation brings out patterns that had previously gone unnoticed: habitual lying, evasion, or passive aggression. A person under pressure may inadvertently expose their own guilt through body language, tone, or inconsistent storytelling. Silence, too, is a powerful response. It can either suggest shame or signal cold detachment. Family dynamics complicate everything. The power structure, parent versus child, provider versus dependent, makes it difficult to maintain clarity. Emotional manipulation often plays a key role. The accused might try to flip the situation, framing it as an overreaction or an insult to their intentions. They may insist that it was all for the good of the family, or worse, claim hurt at the lack of trust. Regardless of the reaction, the confrontation serves a critical purpose. It breaks the illusion. It forces both individuals to acknowledge that the balance has shifted and that something once unspoken now sits heavily between them. Even if the truth remains hidden or denied, the relationship is forever altered. Ultimately, confrontation is not just about extracting answers. It's about reclaiming agency, setting boundaries, and signaling that silent suspicion will no longer be tolerated. Whether the threat is real or not, addressing it directly ensures one thing: the days of passive acceptance are over. After the confrontation, there comes a moment of reckoning, a necessary shift from emotional reaction to deliberate action. When trust is compromised, especially in a situation involving life insurance and potential personal harm, the next steps are not just about protecting feelings. They're about protecting life, autonomy, and legal standing. The first course of action is clarity. Reviewing the full details of the policy is critical. Who is the beneficiary? How much is the coverage? Under what terms can it be contested? And, most importantly, was it fully and knowingly consented to? Many people are shocked to learn they signed documents they didn't fully understand, often under pressure or misdirection. Legal literacy becomes essential. Consulting an attorney or financial advisor is a logical step. This is not paranoia. It's prudence. A professional can determine whether the policy was acquired legally, whether any fraud or coercion was involved, and whether it can be canceled, amended, or flagged. If consent was forged or misleadingly obtained, there could be grounds for legal recourse. Simultaneously, a shift in personal boundaries becomes necessary. Limiting financial access, changing power of attorney, if applicable, and informing a trusted third party, whether a sibling, lawyer, or close friend, can provide a layer of safety. If the situation involves elder vulnerability, contacting adult protective services or a family mediator may also be appropriate. Emotionally, the process is complex. Disillusionment doesn't fade overnight. Relationships once rooted in love now feel transactional, even dangerous. Some choose distance, physical, emotional, or both. Others attempt repair, often through counseling or facilitated dialogue. But no matter the outcome, there's a need to rebuild the personal sense of security that was shaken. There's also the decision of whether to remain silent or speak out. Some choose to share their story publicly, to warn others of similar vulnerabilities. Others keep it private, managing the fallout within the confines of family. Neither choice is wrong. It depends on safety, dignity, and emotional capacity. Ultimately, what comes next isn't about revenge. It's about survival, emotional, legal, and physical. It's about learning to read the signs that were missed the first time and refusing to ignore them again. Because once a line like this is crossed, silence is no longer protection. Action becomes the only way forward.